The gunshot that killed Samuel Pierce echoed through the canyon long after his body hit the ground, and Catherine knew in that moment she had destroyed the only man who had ever truly seen her for who she was. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and the summer heat bore down on the dusty town of Prescott like a punishment from heaven itself. Catherine stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the general store, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that had aged 10 years in the past month. Her hands trembled as she clutched a telegram, the paper already damp with sweat and tears. Samuel Pierce was dead, and it was her fault, even though she had not been the one to pull the trigger. She had loved Samuel with a fierce, desperate love that consumed her entirely. He had been a good man, honest and hardworking, a ranch hand who had courted her properly and promised her a future. But Catherine had been foolish, so desperately foolish, and in her weakness, she had given information to the wrong people. Samuel had been transporting a payroll for the mining company, and she had mentioned the route to her cousin, not knowing he had fallen in with a gang of outlaws. She had not known, but ignorance did not absolve her. The outlaws had ambushed Samuel, and when he had fought back to protect what he carried, they had shot him down like a dog in the street. The marshal had come to her door 3 days ago with the news. Samuel was gone, and with him went any chance Catherine had at redemption. The town knew nothing of her involvement, but she knew, and the knowledge was eating her alive from the inside out. She walked through the dusty streets with no destination in mind, past the saloon where tinny piano music drifted through the doors, past the blacksmith shop where the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil marked the passage of time. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland and distant mountains painted purple in the afternoon light. That was when she saw him. He was working on a fence line, his broad shoulders straining against a worn chambray shirt as he wrestled a post into the hard ground. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing sun-bronzed features and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, someone who knew the land and respected it. Catherine had seen him around town before. His name was James Coulter, and he worked at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside Prescott. He kept to himself mostly, polite but reserved, the kind of man who said more with a look than most men said with 100 words. She had never spoken to him, had never had reason to, but something about the sight of him working steadily in the fading light made her stop. He looked up as if sensing her presence, his eyes finding hers across the distance. They were gray eyes, clear and direct, and they held her gaze for a long moment before he straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Evening, Miss Catherine," he said, his voice carrying easily across the still air. "You look like you have walked a long way." She had not realized he knew her name. "I needed to clear my head," she said, and her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. James studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a canteen hanging from the fence post. "Water is scarce when the sun is this hot. You should drink before you head back." It was not an invitation exactly, but it was not dismissal either. Catherine found herself walking toward him, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He handed her the canteen and she drank gratefully, the water lukewarm but welcome. "I heard about Samuel Pierce," James said quietly. "I am sorry for your loss. He was a good man." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of genuine sympathy that made Catherine's throat tighten. "Yes," she whispered. "He was. You were promised to him, is that right? We were going to be married in the fall." The words came out before she could stop them. "We had plans. A small ranch of our own, children someday. All of it is gone now." James did not offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds or God working in mysterious ways. He simply stood there, solid and present, and somehow that was more comforting than any words could have been. Over the next few weeks, Catherine found herself drawn back to that fence line at the edge of town. James was always there in the evenings, working on some project or another, and he would nod to her in greeting but never push her to talk. Sometimes she would sit on a flat rock and watch him work, finding a strange peace in the quiet companionship. Other times she would help him, holding boards steady or handing him tools, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind. It was on a particularly hot evening in late August that everything changed. Catherine had been holding a post steady while James secured it, and when he finished, he looked at her with those clear gray eyes and said, "You carry a heavy burden, Miss Catherine. I can see it weighing on you." The words broke something open inside her. "You do not understand," she said, her voice cracking. "You cannot understand." "Then help me understand," James said gently. "Whatever it is eating you alive." And so, standing there in the gathering dusk with the cicadas singing their evening song, Catherine told him everything. She told him about her cousin coming to her, asking casual questions about Samuel's work. She told him about mentioning the payroll run, thinking nothing of it, trusting family as she had been raised to do. She told him about the ambush, the murder, the crushing weight of knowing that her words had led directly to Samuel's death. "I betrayed the man I loved," she said, the words torn from someplace deep inside her. "I killed him as surely as if I had pulled the trigger myself. His blood is on my hands, and nothing I do will ever wash it clean." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Catherine waited for James to turn away to look at her with disgust or horror, to tell her she was right and she deserved every moment of suffering she felt. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence solid and unwavering. "Then let me love you anyway now," he said, and his voice was steady and sure. "You made a mistake, Catherine, a terrible mistake, but it was not done with malice. You did not know, could not have known what would come of it. You loved Samuel, and you would have given anything to change what happened. I can see that truth in your eyes. How can you say that?" Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How can you even look at me?" "Because I know what it is like to carry guilt," James said. "I know what it feels like to lie awake at night replaying moments, wishing you could go back and make different choices. During the war, I made decisions that got men killed. Good men, men with families waiting for them. I have lived with that for years, and I know that punishing yourself does not bring anyone back. It does not honor their memory. Living does. Choosing to be better does. Letting yourself heal and grow and love again does." Catherine stared at him, seeing the truth of his words written in the lines around his eyes in the set of his shoulders. "I do not deserve to heal," she said. "I do not deserve to be loved." "That is not for you to decide," James said firmly. "Love is not something we earn or deserve. It is a gift, freely given. And I am telling you right now, Catherine, that I want to give you that gift. I have watched you these past weeks, seen your strength and your pain, and I have fallen in love with who you are. Not despite your mistakes, but including them. All of you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Catherine felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward would change everything. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. "I do not know if I have anything left to give." "You do not have to give me anything right now except a chance," James said. "Let me walk beside you. Let me help carry the weight. You do not have to do this alone anymore." And so Catherine took that step forward, and James caught her as she fell into his arms, holding her as she sobbed out all the grief and guilt and pain she had been carrying. He held her as the sun set, and the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, until the sky was full of light. The path forward was not easy. Catherine struggled daily with her guilt, and there were nights when she woke gasping from nightmares of Samuel's face, accusing her. But James was always there, steady and patient, never trying to rush her healing but simply being present for whatever she needed. He courted her properly, despite the strange circumstances of their relationship. He brought her wildflowers from the rangeland, their bright colors defiant against the harsh landscape. He took her riding through the hills, showing her secret springs and hidden valleys that few people knew existed. He talked to her about his dreams of owning his own spread someday, raising horses that were smart and sure-footed, building something lasting. Catherine found herself slowly coming back to life, like a plant that had been dying of thirst finally getting water. She began to smile again, first tentatively and then more freely. She started to think about the future not as something to be endured but as something that might hold possibility. The town noticed, of course. Some people whispered that it was too soon, that Catherine should mourn longer before allowing another man to court her. But most folks in Prescott understood that life in the territory was hard and short, and happiness should be grabbed with both hands when it presented itself. It was Catherine's guilt that remained the biggest obstacle. One evening in late September, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she turned to James with tears in her eyes. "I feel like I am betraying Samuel again," she confessed. "He loved me and I caused his death, and now I am sitting here happy with another man. What kind of person does that make me?" James took her hand gently. "It makes you human," he said. "Catherine, do you think Samuel would have wanted you to spend the rest of your life alone and miserable? From everything you have told me about him, he loved you deeply. That kind of love does not demand suffering. It wants the beloved to be happy, even if that happiness comes with someone else." "I wish I could tell him I am sorry," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I wish I could make him understand that I never meant for any of it to happen." "Then tell him now," James said. "Not the words that you think you should say, but the truth of your heart. Honor his memory by living the life he wanted for you." So Catherine did. She visited Samuel's grave at the edge of the cemetery, a simple wooden marker with his name carved roughly into the wood. She knelt in the dust and told him everything, the words pouring out of her in a rush. She told him about her guilt, her grief, her fear that she did not deserve to be happy. She told him about James, about the love that was growing despite her resistance, about the possibility of a future she had not thought she would have. And as she spoke, something shifted inside her. She felt as though Samuel was there, listening, and that he forgave her. More than that, she felt his blessing, his desire for her to live and love and find joy despite the tragedy that had brought them both to this point. When she finished, she placed a handful of wildflowers on the grave, the same kind James had given her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for loving me, and I am sorry I failed you, but I promise I will not waste the life I have been given. I will live it fully for both of us." She walked back to town with a lighter heart, feeling as though she had finally set down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. James was waiting for her at the edge of the cemetery, leaning against the fence, and when he saw her face, he smiled. "You look different," he said. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," Catherine admitted. "I think I am finally ready to let myself be happy again." James stepped forward and took her hands in his. "Then let me make you happy," he said. "Marry me, Catherine, build a life with me. I promise I will spend every day showing you how much you are loved." Catherine looked at him, this good man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, and she felt something unfurl in her chest. It was not the desperate, consuming love she had felt for Samuel, but something steadier and deeper, a love built on honesty and acceptance and the choice to keep choosing each other. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a vow. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in October, when the heat of summer had finally broken, and the air held the first hints of coming winter. It was a simple ceremony at the small church in Prescott, with just a handful of friends and neighbors in attendance. Catherine wore a simple blue dress, and James wore his Sunday best, his hat in his hands as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her gently, reverently, as though she were something precious and fragile. And Catherine kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and love and hope she felt, all the promise of the future they would build together. They moved into a small house on the Triple Bar Ranch, where James worked as foreman. It was modest but comfortable, with a kitchen that caught the morning sun and a bedroom with a view of the mountains. Catherine made curtains from flour sacks and planted a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. James built her a chicken coop and brought home 3 hens, which Catherine named after the fates from the Greek myths her mother had taught her as a child. Their first months of marriage were a time of learning and adjustment. James was patient and gentle, never pushing Catherine further than she was ready to go, always mindful of the pain she still carried. He would wake before dawn to start his work on the ranch, and Catherine would wake with him, making coffee and breakfast in the quiet darkness before the rest of the world stirred. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing the stories of their lives, weaving their separate histories into a shared present. James told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 5 brothers, learning to ride before he could walk. He told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done, the friends he had lost. He spoke of it simply, without drama, but Catherine could hear the weight of those memories in his voice. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about losing her parents to fever when she was 16, and coming west to live with her aunt and uncle. She told him about the loneliness of those years, the feeling of being adrift without anchor, until Samuel had come along and offered her a place to belong. "I think that was part of why I fell so hard for him," she confessed one night as they lay in bed, the room lit only by moonlight streaming through the window. "He offered me something I desperately wanted, a home, a family, a sense of purpose. And now?" James asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "Now I have those things again," Catherine said. "But it is different. With Samuel, I think I was trying to fill a hole inside myself, looking for someone to complete me. With you, it feels more like I am whole on my own and you are choosing to walk beside me as an equal. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," James said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That is what love should be. Not 2 halves trying to make a whole, but 2 whole people choosing to share a life." Winter came to the Arizona territory, bringing cold nights and occasional snow to the higher elevations. Catherine and James settled into the rhythms of married life, finding joy in the small domestic routines. She would pack his lunch each morning, tucking in little notes or treats. He would bring her things from town, ribbons for her hair or a new book when the supply wagon came through. They made friends among the other ranch hands and their families, attending barn dances and church socials. Catherine was wary at first, afraid of judgment or whispers about her past, but the community welcomed her. The West was a place where people came to start over, to leave behind old mistakes and old sorrows, and most folks understood that everyone had something they would rather forget. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the rangeland, painting the landscape in brilliant colors. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in late April, and the news filled her with a complex mix of joy and fear. She told James one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes widened, and then a huge grin split his face. "Truly?" he asked, and when she nodded, he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, his hands coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Catherine, we are going to be parents." The fear must have shown on her face because his expression sobered. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. "I thought you would be happy." "I am happy," Catherine said quickly. "I am. It is just, what if I fail this child the way I failed Samuel? What if my mistakes hurt someone else I love?" James cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes serious. "You are not going to fail anyone," he said firmly. "You are one of the strongest, most loving people I know. You made one mistake, Catherine, one time when you did not know the consequences of your actions. That does not define you. And this child is going to be so lucky to have you as a mother." "How can you be so sure?" Catherine whispered. "Because I know you," James said simply. "I see you every day, how you care for the chickens and tend your garden, how you help the neighbors when they need it, how you are patient and kind even when things are difficult. You have so much love to give, Catherine. Our child is going to feel that love every single day." His faith in her was humbling and healing all at once. Catherine leaned into him, letting him hold her, letting his certainty bolster her own wavering confidence. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Catherine felt well, aside from some tiredness in the early months, and she continued her routines around the house and garden. James fussed over her constantly, always worried she was doing too much or pushing herself too hard, and she would laugh and swat him away even as she loved him for his concern. In late June, something happened that Catherine had been dreading. Her cousin rode into Prescott, the same cousin whose betrayal had led to Samuel's death. Catherine saw him from the window of the general store, and her blood ran cold. She had not seen or spoken to him since before the murder, had not known if he was even aware of what his actions had caused. She slipped out the back of the store and hurried home, her heart pounding. She told James what she had seen, and he immediately grew serious. "You want me to speak to him?" James asked. "Make it clear he is not welcome around you." Catherine thought about it, then shook her head. "No," she said slowly. "I need to do this myself. I need to face him and tell him what his actions cost me. I need that closure." James looked concerned but nodded. "Then I will go with you, not to speak for you but to stand beside you. You do not have to do this alone." They found her cousin at the saloon, drinking whiskey in the dim interior. He looked up when Catherine approached, and something flickered across his face. "Guilt, maybe, or fear." "Catherine," he said, his voice rough. "I heard you were here. I was not sure if you would want to see me." "I do not want to see you," Catherine said flatly, "but I need to. I need you to know what you did." Her cousin looked down at his drink. "I know what I did. I know about Samuel Pierce. I am sorry, Catherine. I never thought anyone would get hurt. I just needed the money." "You just needed the money," Catherine repeated, her voice shaking with anger. "So you used information I gave you in trust, family trust, to rob and murder a good man, a man I loved, a man who never hurt anyone in his life." "I did not pull the trigger," her cousin said defensively. "That was not me. I just told them about the route, same as you." "Do not you dare," Catherine said, her voice going cold and hard. "Do not you dare try to make us the same. I told you about Samuel's work because I trusted you, because you were family. You took that information and sold it to killers. Samuel is dead because of you." Her cousin flinched as though she had struck him. "I know," he said quietly. "I have thought about it every day since it happened. I have nightmares about it, but I cannot change it, Catherine. I cannot bring him back." "No, you cannot," Catherine agreed. "And you cannot undo the months I spent hating myself, thinking I was responsible for his death, but you can do one thing for me. You can leave this town and never come back. You can stay out of my life forever. Can you do that?" Her cousin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said, "I can do that. For what it is worth, I truly am sorry." "It is not worth much," Catherine said, "but I hope you find a way to live with what you have done. I hope you find a way to be better." She turned and walked out of the saloon, James at her side. Outside, she took a deep breath of clean air, feeling as though she had purged something toxic from her system. "That was incredibly brave," James said softly. "I do not feel brave," Catherine admitted. "I feel exhausted. But I also feel free. I needed to say those things to put the blame where it actually belongs. I think I can finally stop blaming myself now." James pulled her into his arms, right there on the street, and held her close. "I am so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. That night, Catherine slept more peacefully than she had in over a year, with no nightmares to trouble her rest. The summer passed into fall, and Catherine's belly grew round with the baby. She felt the first flutters of movement in August, and she grabbed James's hand and placed it on her stomach so he could feel it too. His face lit up with wonder, and he spent the rest of the evening talking to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. In late October, as the nights grew cold and the first hints of winter touched the air, Catherine went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, and there were moments when James feared he would lose her. But Catherine was strong and determined, and in the early hours of the morning she delivered a healthy baby boy. James held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny perfect fingers and the shock of dark hair. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Catherine, he is perfect." Catherine, exhausted but glowing with joy, reached for the baby. "What should we name him?" she asked. James thought for a moment, then said gently, "What about Samuel? To honor the man who loved you, who would have wanted you to be happy." Catherine looked at him with wide eyes, tears spilling over. "You would do that. Name our son after him." "It feels right," James said. "He was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. And I think it would help to remember him not with guilt and pain, but with love and gratitude. What do you think?" Catherine looked down at the baby in her arms, seeing the future written in his small face. "Samuel James Coulter," she said softly. "Yes, that feels exactly right." They called the baby Sam, and he grew into a happy, healthy child who was the light of their lives. James proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, teaching his son about horses and cattle and the land. Catherine watched them together and felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude for this second chance she had been given. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Rose for the wildflowers that had been such a part of their courtship. She had Catherine's dark hair and James's gray eyes, and she was fierce and independent from the moment she drew her first breath. The years passed in a blur of everyday moments that added up to a life. James was promoted to ranch manager, and eventually he saved enough to buy a small spread of their own. It was not much, just 100 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing land, but it was theirs. They built a house with their own hands, James and Catherine working side by side, and they moved in on a bright spring day with the children running circles around them in excitement. Catherine planted a garden that grew larger every year, and she became known throughout the county for her vegetables and her kindness. She took in strays, both animal and human, offering meals and help to anyone who needed it. It was her way of giving back, of honoring the second chance she had been given. James built his horse breeding operation slowly and carefully, developing a reputation for quality stock that was sought after across the territory. He treated his animals with respect and gentleness, and they responded with loyalty and intelligence. People would come from miles around to buy a Coulter horse, knowing they were getting an animal they could trust with their life. Sam grew tall and strong with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's compassionate heart. He worked alongside James from a young age, learning the family business, and he showed a natural talent for training horses. Rose was equally capable, refusing to be left behind just because she was a girl. She could rope and ride as well as any boy her age, and she had a mind for numbers that made her invaluable in keeping the ranch accounts. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was peaceful around them, Catherine and James would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about the past, about Samuel and the pain that had brought them together, but mostly they talked about the present and the future, about their blessings and their dreams. "You ever regret it?" Catherine asked one evening, her head resting on James's shoulder. "Taking on a woman with so much baggage, so much pain." James was quiet for a moment, then he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Not for one single second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine, you and our children and this life we have built. Every moment with you has been a gift. Even the hard moments," Catherine asked, "especially the hard moments," James said. "Those are the ones that showed me how strong you are, how brave. Those are the moments that made us who we are together. I would not trade a single one." Catherine turned and kissed him, pouring into it all the love and gratitude she felt, all the wonder that she had been given this chance at happiness after so much sorrow. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, surrounded by friends and family and their growing brood of grandchildren. Sam had married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they had 3 children of their own. Rose had shocked everyone by falling in love with a traveling photographer who had come through the territory, and they lived in Santa Fe, where she helped him run his studio and raised their 2 daughters. Catherine looked around at all these people, all this life and love that had sprung from the ashes of her greatest mistake, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She caught James's eye across the room, and he smiled at her, that same steady, loving smile he had given her that first evening at the fence line all those years ago. Later, when the guests had gone home and they were alone again, James took her hand and led her outside. The night was clear and cool, with a million stars overhead. "I have something for you," James said, pulling a small package from his pocket. 20 years deserve something special." Catherine unwrapped it to find a delicate silver locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of their children and one of the 2 of them on their wedding day. "James," she whispered, tears filling her eyes, "it is beautiful." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle on her skin. 20 years ago, you took a chance on me," he said softly. "You let me love you when you did not think you deserved love. You trusted me with your pain and your guilt and your fear, and you let me help carry it. That trust, that courage is the greatest gift you could have given me." "You saved me," Catherine said simply. "When I was drowning in guilt and grief, you threw me a line and pulled me back to shore. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you said you would love me anyway." "Then let me keep saying it," James said, pulling her close. "Let me keep loving you every day for the rest of our lives. Let me keep showing you how precious you are, how worthy of happiness and joy and all good things." Catherine kissed him under the stars, this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who had taken her broken pieces and helped her put them back together into something new and beautiful. She thought of Samuel, gone these 20 years, and she sent him a silent thank you for loving her first, for showing her what it meant to be cherished. And she thanked him for his blessing, for releasing her to love again, to build this beautiful life from the ruins of their shared tragedy. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost friends to age and accident, watched as the territory changed around them, becoming more settled and civilized. The wild frontier of their youth gave way to towns with schools and churches and telegraph lines, to railroads that connected them to the wider world. But through it all, their love remained constant, a steady flame that neither hardship nor time could extinguish. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with the marks of years spent laughing and working and loving under the Arizona sun. On a warm spring evening in 1915, Catherine sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. James sat beside her, holding her hand as he had done for nearly 40 years. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown and successful, their grandchildren starting to have children of their own. "We have had a good life," Catherine said softly, "better than I ever imagined possible." "The best life," James agreed. "Made possible because you were brave enough to let yourself be loved." Catherine thought back to that desperate, grieving woman she had been so long ago, standing at the edge of town with a heart full of guilt and no hope for the future. She thought of that moment when James had looked at her with clear gray eyes and offered her a lifeline, a chance at redemption and love and joy. "I am so grateful I found you," she said, "or that you found me. However it happened, I am grateful for every moment we have had together." "Then let us be grateful together," James said, "for however many more moments we are given." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to appear one by one, filling the sky with light. Around them, the ranch they had built with their own hands settled into the quiet rhythms of evening. Horses nickered softly in the corral, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. It was a life hard won and deeply appreciated, a life built on honesty and forgiveness, and the daily choice to keep choosing love. Catherine had learned that redemption was not a single moment but a journey, that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about integrating it into a fuller, richer future. She had learned that love was not something to be earned, but something freely given, a gift to be treasured and nurtured and protected. And she had learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best, if we are brave enough to keep walking forward, to keep believing that joy is possible even after terrible sorrow. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Catherine leaned her head on James's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. This was home, she thought. Not the house or the land or any physical place, but this right here, this connection between two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to walk the rest of the way together. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," James said, his voice warm with contentment. "Now and always." And in that moment, with the stars wheeling overhead and the man she loved beside her, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, that all the pain and guilt and fear had been worth it to arrive at this place of peace and joy and abiding love. She had been broken, yes, but she had been remade, and the life she had built from those broken pieces was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined in her youth. The story of how they met, of confession and acceptance and love freely given, became a family legend told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They told it not as a tragedy but as a love story, not as a tale of guilt and punishment, but as a testament to redemption and grace. They told it to remind themselves and others that mistakes do not have to define us, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that it is never too late to choose joy. And when Catherine and James finally passed from this world, many years later and within months of each other, they left behind a legacy not of perfection but of perseverance, not of a life without mistakes but of a life lived fully despite them. They left behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their love forward into the world, who understood that the greatest gift we can give each other is acceptance, the courage to say, "I see all of you, the good and the bad, and I choose to love you anyway." Their graves sit side by side in the small cemetery outside Prescott, simple stones marked with their names and the dates that bookended their years. Visitors sometimes place wildflowers there, the bright desert blooms that James used to bring Catherine during their courtship. And if you listen carefully, standing there in the quiet among the stones and the memories, you might almost hear their voices on the wind, still telling each other the story of how they found love in the wilderness, how confession and acceptance and daily choosing created something that lasted beyond death itself into eternity.